Britain has the legend of King Arthur and his castle Camelot.
Hmm.
Do you know if either of these really existed or are they just pure fiction?
Yes, I'm well aware of them and their existing, what you might consider real castles. They weren't necessarily in your what you consider third dimension, however. So you could interpret them also as a metaphor, but they're actually really existent in what you consider higher frequency. And obviously, there was also a strong connection between the Kingdom of Babylon, for example, was my client, which is also the main reason that the lion depiction found its way in the coat of arms.
Hmm. I wasn't expecting that. I thought it would just be totally fiction. So was Arthur really the king of Britain, or was he just a great warrior?
At the time, it might have been one and the same thing, but I would mostly consider him a warrior.
Do you know roughly how long ago he was born and when he died?
Not quite. It's only that it's much older than what you might consider your modern England, as there's also been a civilization much earlier than what you might be aware of in the region. Not necessarily the same what you consider modern English culture or what you would see as such.
Okay. I'm a little confused. Did you say that he existed in a higher dimension?
The the castle you were referring to.
Okay.
So he had certain abilities. You might also be familiar with the Merlin individual then from your teachings, right?
Right.
Yes, that
So,
must be a person that gave him assistance who existed in what you might consider a parallel universe, is the wrong term, but perhaps the best way for you to understand it, who could shift over. Also, a lot
uh,
of convoluted ideas in your mythology and your teachings and fairy tales, as you call it, such are much more real than you might think, but it's not always literal.
so did Lancelot and his love interest Guinevere really exist?
Certainly. They all exist, those warriors, as you call such.
Hmm.
The
Cool.
round table is why might be aware, yes. The round table idea, all of those individuals that were part of it were actual people. Again, it
Uh,
has been interpreted as much more modern as it existed in what you consider much more ancient times, and the interpretation of it was more modern. So when you see movies, for example, are being produced, the books written about those fairy tales, they're more putting them in a medieval setting, which is somewhat incorrect, but those characters really existed.
awesome. Very interesting. I'm trying to narrow down the time period when King Arthur lived. Do you know if it was before or after the Roman Empire pulled its troops out of Britain?
It existed beyond time at this particular point, or over a longer period of time. It was, as you might consider, another dimensionality. There are numerous versions of it, of Camelot particularly, but it was likely after that.
Okay. And you had said before that Arthur had certain abilities. Can you please elaborate on what you meant by that? Was he a starseed?
Merlin likely was. Not as much Arthur himself, but he was taught by him.
Okay.
Similar to Leonardo da Vinci.
Was there anything special about Arthur's sword Excalibur? For example, did he really pull it out of a stone or anvil, as some stories say?
It was much later, yes. He was already given the sword by someone else. Not necessarily one of us, but someone from outside of his consciousness, or outside of the world he was living in. Outside of his consciousness, is the best way I can put it.
What did you mean it happened much later on? You mean like whenever he pulled the sword out of a stone, that happened later on?
Yes.
So why did it end up in a stone?
Someone with special abilities put it there. One could say it was put there to test his abilities. One could also say it was malicious intent to take it away from him. It's just two ways to look at it. Another way he put it there himself.
Cool. All right. Now another question. You had said that the Castle Camelot existed in a higher dimension. Who actually built it and why?
Many numerous versions doesn't have stories surrounding it, as you might be familiar. Felines were also closely connected to the particular person, and the Merlin person certainly helped him construct this whole endeavor in the first place. The Merlin was really the conductor and the guide that he had throughout the course of his life, particularly in the creation of the Knights of the Round Table. And sometimes people weren't familiar with what happened to them when they crossed over. They just walked through a fog and then they were in another world or another castle. It was somehow a version of what Earth could be in a parallel world.
So does Camelot still exist today?
You would say so. But it can only be accessed by people that reach this particular portal, if you wish. It's a strange term.
Are you allowed to say roughly where it's located?
It is not really located in your current day-to-day life, in your day-to-day world, in your 3D world. It is obviously accessible through your English Peninsula, but I'm trying to find the correct terms in David's mind. It is not in a physical location.
Right.
Same way you could run into beings that have been described in mythology as elves or gnomes, that they exist no less, but they might not be physically present in your world, that you are expecting, for example, to run into an elephant when you go venture off to India or Africa to see a natural phenomenon in that sense.
Right. Can you tell me a little bit about who Merlin really was?
Likely what you would consider a starseed. And a guide, again, function for art. Mainly a starseed who incarnated also like so many others with what you might consider special abilities, which then later would be concerned with magic. Again, comparable to the assistant of the Leonardo da Vinci person who guided much of his endeavors while staying in the background, even though Merlin obviously also made it more into the history books. Or mythology, at least.
How did he die, or is he still alive?
He simply vanished again. Same way Camelot.
Is it possible for Camelot or Merlin to appear? I mean, is it possible for anyone in our reality to ever meet or visit them?
It's a tricky question, because as long as you're in your reality, you won't be able to, but you can shift over from your reality and therefore be no longer somebody from your reality, and then yes, you are in the reality where you can meet them. So the answer is yes and no, depends if you wish to stay in your reality throughout the process or not.
Okay, I think I understand the general idea. Okay.
The same way you can shift to different time frames, realities, like the one where certain historical events have not taken place or differently, or the way you can enter another reality through your Bermuda Triangle, or people that are witnesses of Bigfoot or similar phenomena that others might not be able to witness in this particular time frame.
Right. Okay, another question. Can you tell me what the Kingdom of Avalon is and how you, the felines, are connected to it?
Many of the original Lyran strain you previously asked about have put their best people forward, so to speak, in this particular region of beyond time and space, as you have said, to found something like a kingdom that would be a representation of what has been originally established in Egypt much early on. Well, strong connection from there to Egypt, which is also the reason that many people from the original Egyptian region ventured off there, which is also the reason there's a great genetic combination between the rulers of Egypt and the later rulers of Great Britain. And the feline connection also found its way in obviously the British coat of arms, for example, but it doesn't necessarily mean the people that currently the British can't have anything to do with us much more with the so-called Illuminati families. It's just an original tradition that was kept alive in that way. It is always difficult to put such spiritual concept into words that understandable in your language.
Right. So was the Kingdom of Avalon, was it, or rather is it, located in the town of Glastonbury, like some people believe?
Yeah, parallel version, for example, but some further northwestern region of that city, but again, you would have to step in there to a portal. Right. A sample I find it from David's Mind is a fantasy novel of an author taking a train. By taking a train not from one particular station, but in between stations.
I think you're talking about the Harry Potter books.
I believe so.
Okay, yeah. Cool, interesting.
Very oversimplification, but that's the way probably the average person in your world can somehow relate to what I'm saying.
Right, cool. Well, speaking of Harry Potter, I mean, not to go off too far on tangent here, but do you know if the author of those books, J.K. Rowling, was somehow either a starseed, or did she channel any information about those books?
Unbeknownst to herself, a lot of people in your world that are successful fantasy novel writers are obviously involved with what you consider perhaps some type of automatic writing. They're not necessarily in a trance state when they're writing, but they get certain ideas for the don't know where they're coming from, the same as your scientific authors.
Cool. Okay, well, another question then. So most stories about King Arthur say that he was preparing to march on Rome when he learned that his nephew Mordred seized the throne and married Arthur's love interest Guinevere. So he then goes to battle with Mordred and kills him, but is wounded and taken to Avalon to recover, but is never seen again. Do you know if this is correct?
Yes, he was simply transitioning over. There are many of those legends over all over your European continent of a king or queen going off and then suddenly disappearing, and never to be seen again, and nobody knows who is now rule of the realm. Again, there's a parallel world. Another would be the Barbarossa person from around the Bavarian region.
I see. So what happened to Arthur after he arrived in Avalon? Did he just live there for the rest of his life?
Yes, much to dismay perhaps some of his followers. Also in the guidance of Merlin.
Do you know where he's buried today?
Not really. If you consider buried. Even if his physical form would be buried, he wouldn't be there.
Right. Now, the reason I had said before that I expected the King Arthur legend to be pure fiction is because all of the stories we have about him were written hundreds of years later by people who obviously never met him. Do you know how all these authors received all this detailed information about him? Did they channel it?
Some was channeled, some was also taken out of context of historical facts, the same way you mentioned previously the religious text of Bible and Quran.
Right.
So not all details you will read were entirely correct.
I see. Well, I think we're almost out of time for today, so maybe this will be my last question. Some of the later stories about King Arthur mention the Knights of the Round seeing an image of the Holy Grail over the Round Table and then trying to go out and find it. Do you know if this really happened?
them going to find Holy Grail, yes, definitely, and what they might have seen is a holographic projection. The Holy Grail, however, has been many interpretations in many ways, shape, or forms, not necessarily always the idea of the cup.
So what was the Holy Grail really? Was it connected to Jesus?
The bloodline of Jesus.
Um, the bloodline of Jesus, was it a physical cup or anything like that?
Yeah, there were many interpretations of such, and there was obviously a physical cup that was also stemming from this particular time, and therefore it was also seen as being a symbol for where the bloodline of Jesus still ran.
Yeah, like there's a popular book and movie called The Da Vinci Code, which portrays the Holy Grail as sort of like, as you just mentioned, like the bloodline of Jesus, like his descendants. So is that more the correct version of what the Holy Grail really is?
Again, there are numerous interpretations of such, and there was indeed a cup that was filled with blood, as you're familiar with the story of the idea of the blood of Jesus being caught in the cup. After
Right.
he was, yes, pierced. But it can also, of course, be read as the metaphor of the blood getting caught, in actuality being rather his descendants that were passed on, not necessarily in the way it's portrayed in the book that you mentioned. But it is indeed that he had descendants and they passed on, and very often it has been referred to as the Grail, which in reality was the bloodline. But there are also certain groups that you are also linked to the Illuminati that have always made their best effort to infiltrate any bloodlines, which then of course is also mentioned previously in the book that you just referenced, but in a much distorted fashion.
I see. Can you tell me who Arthur's mother and father were?
He descended from a certain lineage that was linked to Atlantis. I don't have names, however, for his father and mother.
Okay. Do you know if they were descended from the Anunnaki?
Well, that Anunnaki is a very old blanket term from your modern pop culture, modern and ancient civilization, but certain people that you might call such that came from Hyperborea, yes, that were seated there, if you want to call them that.
Okay.
That's the lineage from which he hailed, and he was also part of a civilization that existed in your North Sea.
Okay. Uh, so do you know, like, why Arthur was chosen to be king, or like how he became king? I mean, like, how did his people or whatever choose him to be king, or how did he end up in this position?
He came from this very lineage that I just described, and yes, he had certain ancestors that were what you might then term gods. So in some ways he would be described a half god, or well, not a half god, but maybe a 16th god or something in your other civilizations at the time or your mythology.
Okay. Um, and like before we started talking, I asked David to take a look at a map of like modern day England. Are you able to look at that map and see like where the king, like the castle of Camelot, which city it's closest to in terms of modern day England?
Hmm. Well, there were numerous cities that have been linked to Camelot. There was one near Sussex,
Okay.
in the region. There was one off England, more, well, it's sunk in similar to Atlantis, but the one that's still known is likely in that region I just mentioned.
Okay. So, I mean, we kind of talked about this before about like the possibility of somebody visiting Camelot. I mean, like if somebody were to go in, like for example, if you were to give the exact GPS coordinates to Camelot, like would it be possible for somebody to, like, I don't know, either detect that it exists somehow or to visit it or anything like that?
Likely there's nothing left. This was what you call a long time ago and what I call enough in frequency. Some of it again is also sunken underwater.
Okay. All right. So shortly before Arthur was injured by Mordred and left for Avalon, supposedly he was preparing to march his forces on Rome. Do you know the name of the emperor of Rome at this time?
Well, there are numerous stories, obviously. Well, the first idea that comes up is Caligula, right? However, there was also an interpretation that was put on him later. It was likely Caligula, from what I'm aware of, but I'm also just reading your own record, so it was possible that it has been attributed to Arthur later on when it was another timeline.
Okay. Did Arthur really conquer and hold territory across the English Channel in what today is France?
Yes. And also what is today Helgoland, from what I'm aware.
Okay.
It was also part of what you might consider a version of Atlantis or something similar with sunken civilization that existed in North Sea. It was part of it.
Okay.
North of that island.
So why did Arthur want to conquer Rome anyway?
Same way Napoleon or Genghis Khan, many others in your modern time want to expand their empire.
Okay.
It was not much of a spiritual reason if you're referring to that, other than the idea of spreading his ideals. To have a greater empire, after all, he was a king.
Right, right. What was the Knights of the Round? I mean, were they connected to the Knights Templar or the Illuminati in any way?
Not so Illuminati from what I'm aware of. The Knights Templar are possible and the rest of those secret societies.
Okay. So was King Arthur really associated with the Knights of the Round?
Yes, he was.
Okay. Uh, why were they so interested in finding the Holy Grail, either the physical cup itself or Jesus' bloodline? I mean, why did either matter to them?
Well, to some degree in this particular day and age, they're much interested in the origins of certain bloodlines because they consider them more powerful than others, and therefore this particular one that played a role during your medieval era obviously played a large role because, well, that was the power structure the time was built upon. And of course, there was also the idea it would give special powers to people.
Okay. So were they ever successful in finding either the cup or Jesus' descendants?
Not from what I'm aware of, no.
Okay.
I likely found some cup and it was likely passed on later as such, but I'm not certain if it was the real one or not.
Okay. Do you have any idea where the real cup is today?
I'm not certain.
Okay.
It perhaps was found later on. It might even be located in the Vatican or another archive.
Okay. Do you know why Jesus' descendants choose to remain in hiding today instead of revealing themselves publicly?
I'm not even certain if they're aware themselves that they're.
Okay. All right. Well.
It's also likely the bloodline got diluted to some degree, so there might be many that are to some percentage
Right. Right.
part of the lineage.
Right.
You said before that many of the original Lyre and Strain have put their best people forward in the region of Avalon beyond time and space. First of all, like, who are these best people that you were talking about? Like, were they felines or humans? And what did you mean about them being put forward?
Well, the idea simply being a much lighter topic, by the way. The idea is that certain of the true of what you might consider hybrids have been visiting energetically, or whatever you want to call it, this place, this area that in your mythology has been named Avalon later on, and beings that had contact, for example, with the person that you now call Arthur, or other what you call Knights of the Round Table, etc. Some of them were, well, what I would consider the best from the best people they had for the mission, so to speak, in this particular bloodline of hybridized human, feline, whoever you want to call those beings of a Lyran blood strain.
Okay. So are you saying Arthur and Merlin physically met these hybrids?
It was more likely that they met, well, they had some form of contact. It's possible at least Merlin had some form of physical contact as well, but remember, it's the whole story is mythological, subsequently changed to some degree. Yes, they had some form of contact, but I was mainly referring to telepathic communication the same way I'm speaking to David right now. But indeed, the Merlin person might have had more.
Okay. Do you know if anybody that Arthur was aware of was able to channel extraterrestrials like David's doing now?
Not in the same manner that I'm speaking to David right now, but perhaps more in a conscious manner, having a back and forth communication. Like
Okay.
I'm usually talking to David when I'm not currently speaking through him verbally.
Okay. So would you consider Arthur to be what Kalask would call airy-fairy, meaning he was more lightful and mainly wanted to just help the people, or was he more of an emperor who mainly cared about power and territory and ego things?
Well, it's likely a combination of those from my perspective at least. I would say he had good intention, but as usually in your world, good intentions can become corrupted, depends what power structures they're being impacted by. But his original intention was likely a very good one, and he was in general what I would at least consider a just person.
Okay. Now, something else that confused me whenever we were talking about Arthur before, you had said that King Arthur likely lived during the time after the Roman Empire pulled its troops out of Britain, which was during the beginning of the 400s AD. And I had asked if you knew the name of the emperor of Rome when Arthur was preparing to march his forces on Rome. And you said that the name that comes to mind is Caligula, but there are numerous stories, and you said that it's possible this was attributed to Arthur later, when it was on another timeline. Now, Caligula, he was the emperor of Rome between the years 37 and 41 AD, which was obviously hundreds of years before the Romans left Britain. Did you mean it's possible there was another timeline where Arthur was alive at the same time as Caligula, or is it more likely that, I don't know, some details of maybe an older king of Britain who marched against Caligula got mixed into the Arthur story?
It depends who exactly you're referring to. As I said, there's numerous mythological reinterpretations of the story, and there was also something like a kingdom even before any Romans even landed on the peninsula that existed there. It has to do with an earlier civilization that lived on the continent, and some remnant of those memories are also mixed in with those stories that later emerged around the House of Persia in the same manner that you also have stories from numerous great floods on your planet that are more or less mixed all into one in your Bible story, for example. The newer and younger your stories are, the more often they're a conglomeration of older events that happened over a much longer stretch of time to numerous people that later on get put together into one person or one crew of people.
Okay. But again, I don't know, did Caligula have any connection at all to Arthur?
To one particular person whose memory has gotten put into the Arthur story, yes. Well, not exactly certain.
Okay.
If that is the person that you are currently thinking of, as again, most of what you have as mythology and in movies and in storylines is very often mixed in with different ideas from much older times, and there's also an Arthur story, so to speak, that dates back again before Romans ever set foot there.
Okay, but like the Arthur that the one who was like king of parts of Britain, like shortly after the Romans left Britain, like did he ever march on Rome?
I believe it was, or if there was such a conflict or an impact on Rome that was much earlier, or another version, if you wish, or another aspect that later got mixed into the story.
Okay. So yeah, basically it's kind of like Jesus, where there were a bunch of different people and like they all got kind of combined into one person that we call King Arthur.
Yes, so for example, Cleopatra or Nebuchadnezzar and many other of your so-called great rulers in history also intentionally in some cases surmassed the achievements of other individuals on them and attributed their failures to others, etc.
Okay. Now, like you had said before, whenever you were talking about Camelot, it almost sounded like you were saying that there was more than one castle that Arthur owned or whatever. So, I mean, do you know if in fact there were multiple castles that like later got called Camelot?
Again, compared to different time lines, or not timelines, but time frames, and the idea of there being a larger kingdom associated to what has later been called Camelot, there was more to it, and also some of this also relates to areas that are now no longer existent in your current British peninsula. So yes, there was more to it, but again, you wouldn't find any of this physically.
Okay. And you had said before that like Camelot, at least one of the Camelot castles was in Suffolk, or and then it sounded like you said Sussex, and I know like there's a Suffolk County in the east of Britain, and then there's a county named Sussex, like in the south. Can you see that map in David's mind that I sent him and see like where I guess like the main Camelot castle was?
My Camelot Castle was literally on neither one of those two areas, but rather in what you would now consider the North Sea. However, it's likely closer to Sussex, as there was a land bridge connecting the British Isle to the mainland of Europe, but again, it was a larger kingdom in the area that encompassed those numerous British counties, as well as some of the northern coast of France and likely also Belgium. But the
Oh,
main area would have likely been in what you would now consider areas of the North Sea that are close to Sussex.
okay. Um, so was the castle on some kind of cliff, like right at the edge of the sea, or was it more inland?
More in the sea.
In the sea, like what do you mean? Like a rocky island or something?
Well, what it might have been at some point. Likely now it would be under the sea.
So are you talking about the one like near Sussex County in the south of Britain?
Yes.
Okay. Um yeah, and I know like a lot of cities and castles that used to exist along the coast of Britain during the Roman times have been like just washed away into the sea like from big storms and just from the sea like eroding away cliffs and things like that. So do you think this is kind of what happened to the Camelot near Sussex County? Like it was just kind of destroyed over time by storms and erosion?
Yes, not necessarily by erosion, but storms, yes. And sinking of an entire area just fell off the cliff, so to speak, or not necessarily in long-term erosion, but some form of perhaps an earthquake or something similar that helped a certain, not an earthquake, but something else that led to a certain landmass or just falling off the cliff or off the land of England and sinking into the North Sea. I'm not sure what words to use.
Okay. you were saying before how our modern King Arthur figure is a conglomeration of a lot of different people, and like from what I can tell, is it seems like there were at least three people that got combined into the King Arthur, like the mythological version of him. Like, one would be the one that you mentioned lived in Britain before the Romans ever set foot there. Another one who lived at the same time as Caligula, and then another one who lived there after the Romans had left Britain. Do you know if these three were all part of the same house, meaning like the same family lineage?
That's unlikely. Or there was also another one that's lived much earlier.
How earlier, before Atlantis sank?
Yes, very likely.
Okay. Um, do you know, like, do you know which of the people that got combined into the conglomeration was the one who lived and interacted with the wizard Merlin?
It was most likely the earliest or the second earliest one, certainly before the Roman invasion.
Do you know if this person's name was actually Arthur?
Most likely an older version of the name, so it's only likely a translated version.
Okay. Uh, do you know if this person, the one who lived at the same time as Merlin, was also the one who interacted with Lancelot and Guinevere and Mordred?
Most likely, yes.
Okay.
The Camelot version, yes.
Yeah, like that's the one that I would consider to be the main, King Arthur. I mean, the one who lived with Merlin and who lived in Camelot. But like, can you say, do you know roughly how many thousands of years ago this person lived? I mean, was it like kind of like halfway between the sinking of Atlantis and today, or before Atlantis sank, or what?
Most likely for Atlantis sank or not long after.
Okay. Do you know if this person was also the one who left for Avalon?
Yes.
Okay.